We often think of ourselves humans as, the cream of the crop. Hyper-intelligent, logical brains. The peak of evolution. I mean, look at what we've built. Civilizations, moon landings, AI.
Mm.
Surely our brains are these, perfect machines. But what if? What if that amazing brain is actually, well, kind of unreliable? What if it comes with some significant design quirks? Today we're taking a deep dive into a really fascinating book called Bizarre Brain Science by Gary Marcus. He's a psychology professor at NYU. And the book really unpacks this whole idea. It's not about saying the brain isn't amazing, because it is. It's about understanding its power and its surprising flaws.
Exactly. That's the core idea. Our brains do incredible things, no doubt, but they weren't perfectly engineered from scratch. The author uses this great term he calls the brain a kluge.
And kluge. What's that?
It's an engineering term. It basically means a solution that's kind of clumsy, maybe inelegant, but it works. It's built from ill-fitting parts cobbled together over a really long evolutionary process. Imagine building a computer, but you're adding mismatched parts over millions of years. It gets the job done, it's powerful, but it's not always going to be efficient or logical or, totally reliable.
A kluge. I like that. So it's clumsy but effective. And the key isn't just knowing it's imperfect, right? It's understanding why it's a kludge. Because then you can sort of work with its design, not just fight against it.
Yeah.
Leverage the strengths, spot the blind spots, make better decisions.
Precisely. Knowing these factory defects, as the book calls them, helps us see why things like continuous learning, critical thinking, really training our minds, why they're so incredibly important.
Okay, so our brains are these brilliant kludges. Where do these imperfections, these quirks, actually show up in our daily lives? Let's unpack this. We're going to explore 4 key areas the book highlights: our memory, our beliefs, the choices we make, and even how we chase happiness. So first up, memory. Let's start here because I think everyone can relate to memory glitches. Quick question. Do you remember what you had for breakfast, say, 2 days ago?
Probably not clearly.
Right. Or how about every single family member's phone number? Or all those historical dates, those formulas you crammed for in school.
Long gone for most of us.
And the classic one, ever just lose your keys. Or forget your wallet right when you're walking out the door. Happens to me constantly.
Well, if that sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. These aren't personal failures. They're universal traits of the human brain. Our memory is just inherently imperfect. It forgets things, especially over time. And maybe more surprisingly, it's easily interfered with, distorted even. You might think you remember something perfectly, but the details, the time, the place, who was there, they can get twisted without you even realizing it.
Okay, so it's not just forgetting, it's also kind of misremembering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's really striking when you compare it to, say, computer memory. Computers use what the author calls postal code memory.
Postal code memory?
Yeah, every piece of data has a specific address, right? You can find it instantly. It's a direct lookup. But our brains, totally different. There's no clear encoding system like that. We know regions involved in memory, sure, but not the exact spot for one specific memory. Instead, our brains rely on background clues, on the context to retrieve information. That's why the author calls it context-dependent memory.
Context-dependent memory. Okay, that's a key idea. So if our memories are tied to the situation, the context, does that mean being in the right place can actually help you remember something? Like a word on the tip of your tongue.
Absolutely. That's one of the main characteristics the book talks about. First, memory is heavily influenced by our surroundings. So yeah, if you're at the seaside, you're probably better at recalling stuff about the ocean. In the kitchen, cooking facts might surface.
Okay.
Go back to your hometown, bam! Childhood memories flood back. Even just seeing a familiar object, hearing a certain sound or a smell, it can trigger a memory instantly, like flipping a switch. There are even Chinese idioms for this, like touching scene evokes feeling or seeing an object recalls a person. It's a deep-seated thing.
Wow. And does this context thing affect more than just recall, like our mood?
Definitely. Because memory and context are so linked, our emotions and actions get swayed too. A pleasant environment can boost your mood. A negative one can drag you down. So, if you're feeling low, sometimes just changing your environment, going for a walk, moving to a different room can genuinely help shift your state.
That's practical advice.
And it can even scale up to societal issues. Think about historical memory and stereotypes. Implicit bias, for example. Deeply ingrained contexts mean that sometimes seeing a person of a certain race might unconsciously trigger associated prejudices, even in people who consciously reject racism. The context triggers the flawed memory association.
That's sobering. Okay, so context is huge. What's the other main characteristic of this context-dependent memory?
The other big one is how our brain prioritizes information. It doesn't treat all data equally like a computer does. Instead, it bumps up information that's common, that you use frequently, and stuff you accessed recently, puts it right at the front of the queue, so to speak.
Ah, so it's like an efficiency hack.
Yeah.
Because our brain cells are way slower than computer chips, right?
Millions of times slower, yeah. So prioritizing saves a ton of time and energy. We don't have to sift through every single memory trace to find what we need most often.
Makes sense. But what's the trade-off? There's always a trade-off, isn't there?
There is. The cost of that efficiency is accuracy.
Uh,
That's why you can't remember breakfast from 2 days ago. The clue breakfast is just too broad. It gets mixed up with hundreds, maybe thousands of other breakfast memories. They interfere with each other.
so perfect memory is basically a fantasy.
Pretty much. But understanding this context dependency gives us power. We can fight the natural decay with things like rote learning for crucial facts. And we adapt our lives using habits, like always putting your keys in that one specific bowl by the door.
Guilty as charged. I have that exact bowl.
Right. It's not just being organized, it's a strategy. You're creating a reliable context cue to counteract your brain's inherent forgetfulness. You're working with the kluge.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense for memory. Let's shift gears. From memory, let's talk about something maybe even more fundamental. Our beliefs. Do you think your beliefs are solid, well-reasoned, truly your own? Let's try a little test. I'm going to read a short description. Just listen and think about how well it fits you. Ready?
Okay, listening.
Here it is. You need to be liked and admired by others, yet you are often critical of yourself. While you have some personality flaws, you are generally able to compensate for them. You also possess many undeveloped potentials that have not yet been transformed into your strengths. On the surface, you appear disciplined, but deep down you are often filled with anxiety and insecurity. So how did that land? Did it feel spot on? Maybe a little too accurate?
It sounds pretty familiar, yeah. Vague enough to apply to almost anyone.
Exactly. That's the trick. This is a classic description from psychologist Bertram Forer. It's designed to be vague and broadly applicable, a bit like a horoscope. But we tend to read deep meaning into it, especially the positive parts. It's called the Forer effect, or sometimes the Barnum effect. It shows how easily we can be swayed, how we find specific meaning in general statements.
It's a fantastic illustration, and it points to a key idea from the book. Belief, like language, is a relatively late evolutionary development for humans. And despite having these powerful cognitive systems, we're surprisingly suggestible, easily manipulated, prone to superstition, rumors. Often, we don't even really know where our beliefs come from, and we're often totally unaware of how irrelevant information is constantly nudging our thinking.
Manipulable. And that's a bit unsettling, isn't it? Thinking we're rational, but actually quite easily swayed. Does the book explain how this happens? What are the mechanisms?
It does. It highlights several psychological effects. One big one is the halo effect.
The halo effect. Like if someone's good looking, we assume they're smart too.
Exactly that kind of thing. Or if we like one aspect, maybe they're famous or charismatic, we tend to view their other qualities positively too, even if they're totally unrelated. That's why celebrity endorsements work, or why there's often a documented beauty premium in things like job interviews or promotions.
Wow.
And the flip side is true too. If you dislike one thing about someone, you might just dismiss everything else about them without any real logical basis. It's like a negative halo.
Okay, so that's one. What else?
Then there's the focus illusion. This is fascinating. Basically, whatever we're currently paying attention to seems more important than it really is, and we assume other things are related to it. There was this study with students. They asked 2 questions. Are you happy?
Okay.
And how many dates did you have last month?
Okay.
If they asked about happiness first, then dating, there was basically no connection found between the answers.
Right.
But if they asked about dating first, suddenly people's reported happiness seemed directly linked to their dating life.
Whoa. Just changing the order.
Yep. Focusing them on their dating life made it seem like the primary driver of their happiness, whether it was or wasn't. Attention created a perceived link.
That's slightly terrifying. Our attention can literally reshape our perceived reality. What about completely random stuff influencing us?
That's mental contamination. It's where totally irrelevant information sneaks in and biases our judgment without us noticing. The book describes an experiment. People spun a lucky wheel, like Wheel of Fortune, with numbers from 1 to 100. Then they were asked to estimate the percentage of African countries in the UN.
Completely unrelated tasks.
Totally unrelated, but guess what? People who spun higher numbers on the wheel gave significantly higher estimates for the UN percentage. Those who spun lower numbers gave lower estimate.
No way. The random number anchored their guess.
It seems so. The irrelevant number contaminated their thinking process.
Okay, the halo effect, focus illusion, mental contamination. Taken together, it paints a picture of, well, us not being as in control of our beliefs as we'd like to think.
It does suggest our self-awareness can be pretty weak sometimes. Our attention gets pulled easily. Our thoughts are more malleable than we realize. It really forces you to ask, are my beliefs genuinely based on sound reasoning and evidence? Or are some of them just prejudices, biases I've picked up unconsciously?
And you see the consequences everywhere, don't you? Political polarization, religious conflicts, even arguments within families. So often it seems to stem from people having different beliefs because they're only seeing the facts that confirm what they already think.
That's confirmation bias, another related issue. It's
Yeah.
not always intentional dishonesty. It's often just how our kluge brains tend to work filtering reality to fit our existing framework.
So the antidote, how do we fight this?
Well, the book suggests consciously trying to gain an outsider's perspective. Step back. Try to see the situation as someone uninvolved would. It helps break through your own biases and see the bigger picture, not just the selective parts your brain prefers.
Get some distance.
Yeah.
Okay, that leads us naturally into choices. If our beliefs are shaky, what about our decisions? Are we rational actors? Let's talk about the famous marshmallow test again. 4-year-olds choosing between one marshmallow now or two later. Many grab the one right away. Nearly half can't wait even 20 minutes.
A classic display of poor impulse control.
Right. And you might think, okay, that's kids. They lack self-control. Adults are better. But are we? Let's scale it up. Offer an adult $100 right now, cash in hand, or $300 guaranteed, but you have to wait 3 years.
The immediate reward is tempting.
Very tempting. And studies show a surprising number of adults take the 100 now. Reminds me of that Warren Buffett quote. What was it?
Few people are willing to get rich slowly.
That's the one. It captures this perfectly.
And we see this short-sightedness everywhere in adult life, don't we? People want to be fit but can't resist unhealthy food or skip workouts.
Or wanting to finish a work project but getting lost scrolling on their phone for hours.
The book even gives this extreme example. A prisoner with a 90-day sentence trying to escape on day 89 just couldn't wait one more day for guaranteed freedom.
Unbelievable. Why?
Yeah.
Why are we wired like this? To value the immediate so much more than the clearly better future reward. Is it another evolutionary kluge?
Very much so,
Right.
according to the author. It goes back to those two brain systems we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
You've got the ancestral or reflex system, super old, hundreds of millions of years. It's automatic, fast, handles survival basics, breathing, balance, reacting instantly to threats. It's our default crisis mode.
The lizard brain, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Then there's the deliberative system, much newer, maybe only the last 50,000 years or so. Resides largely in the prefrontal cortex. This is where language, planning, complex reasoning happen.
Okay, old brain, new brain, so they fight.
Constantly. The ancient ancestral system often hijacks the controls from the newer deliberative system. That powerful urge for immediate gratification. Grab the food now. Take the pleasure now. Get the small profit now. That's the ancestral system screaming. It reflects millions of years where resources were scarce and immediate. If you found food, you ate it now. There was no guarantee of later.
So delayed gratification isn't natural.
It's a learned behavior, the book argues, something that really became crucial only with agriculture, when planning for future harvests became essential for survival. Our instincts are still rooted in that immediate past.
Wow. So our modern struggles with saving money or sticking to diets are literally battles between brain regions from different eras.
In a way, yes. And it's not just about immediate versus delayed rewards. Other irrationalities pop up, too, like how we judge value.
Oh, yeah, the book had great examples here. Talk about the microwave versus the TV.
Well, right. So imagine a microwave costs $100. You find out you can get it for $70, $30 off if you travel across town. Most people say, yeah, worth it. 30% saving feels good.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, imagine a TV cost $1,000. Same deal. Travel across town, save the exact same $30. Now it's only a 3% saving. Suddenly, many people think, nah, not worth the trip for just $30.
But it's the same $30 and the same bus ride.
Exactly. Logically, the absolute saving is identical. If the time cost is acceptable for the microwave, it should be acceptable for the TV. But we get fixated on the relative percentage saving.
Why do our brains do that? That seems fundamentally illogical.
The author links it back to something called the approximate number system, which seems to be present in most vertebrates, not just humans. Basically, the perceived difference between small numbers feels bigger than the same difference between large numbers. Like, the jump from 1 to 2 feels psychologically larger than the jump from 101 to 102.
Huh. So it's a built-in estimation system that's not great with precise calculation.
Pretty much. And many of our higher cognitive functions seem built on top of this older approximate system. Another kluge.
It just keeps coming back to that kludge idea. What about price anchoring? That one always gets me.
Ah, yes. Classic sales tactic. You see a coat marked at $1,000, you haggle, maybe the salesperson gives you a deal, and you get it for $700. You feel great, like you won.
Yeah, definitely.
But if that same coat was just sitting there with a $700 price tag from the start, no discount, no negotiation, you might walk away thinking, $700 is a bit steep.
Even though it's the exact same coat for the exact same final price.
Precisely. The initial higher price anchors your perception of its value. Getting the discount feels like a gain, even if the final price is objectively the same. It's irrational, but powerful.
The book mentioned a few others too, didn't it? Sunk cost fallacy, throwing good money after bad, mental accounting.
Right, treating money differently depending on where it came from or what you mentally earmarked it for. Like, people are more willing to gamble with found money than their salary.
And framing effects. How you phrase something changes how people feel about it. The example of 7% crime rate sounding way worse than 93% non-crime rate.
Which ties right back to what we said about context-dependent memory and belief, doesn't it?
How so?
Negative words like death in death tax or crime in crime rate automatically trigger negative associations in our memory banks. They prime us to feel negatively. Use neutral or positive framing inheritance tax, non-crime rate, and the same underlying fact becomes much more palatable. It's exploiting another quirk of our associative, context-driven brains.
It really is all interconnected. Okay, one last big area. Happiness. Humans seem unique in how relentlessly we pursue happiness, right? Freud even said something like, happiness is our guide. Without it, species wouldn't multiply.
He did, and it's true. Look at how much time and energy we spend on things purely for pleasure, things with no obvious reproductive benefit. TV shows, video games, music, sports, hobbies, even harmful stuff like addictions to smoking or alcohol. No other animal dedicates so much effort to just feeling good.
So here's the paradox the book explores. We chase happiness constantly. We invent countless ways to feel pleasure, but it often seems so fleeting, doesn't it? Does evolution give us perfect happiness mechanisms?
The book argues no. They're flawed, kludgy, just like memory and choice.
How so? Like, why do we procrastinate on important work to scroll through social media or gossip? We know finishing the work would bring long-term satisfaction, maybe even happiness.
Or knowing sugary foods are bad for us, but still reaching for the candy bar for that instant hit of pleasure.
Right. It's that immediate gratification thing again, isn't it? Prioritizing the short-term buzz over the long-term benefit or happiness.
Exactly. And even when we achieve big goals, the happiness bump is often surprisingly short-lived. The book uses the example of American university professors striving for tenure. It's this huge, stressful goal.
Massive pressure, yeah.
When they finally get it, they're often ecstatic. Huge relief, joy. But that intense happiness, it fades remarkably quickly. New worries, new goals soon take over.
And what about those who don't get tenure?
They feel loss, disappointment, for sure. But studies show that negative feeling also doesn't last as long as they predict it will. We adapt both the good news and bad news faster than we think. Our happiness level tends to return to a baseline.
That totally explains the disconnect between wealth and happiness we often see. The book mentioned Japan, right?
Yeah, between 1958 and 1987, average family income in Japan quintupled a massive increase in wealth.
5 times richer. You'd expect them to be way happier.
But the National Happiness Index barely budged. More money didn't translate into significantly more long-term happiness, likely because people just adapted to the new standard of living.
It's like getting a new pair of shoes.
How do you mean?
Well, when you first get them, you're super excited, right? You're
Yeah.
careful not to scuff them. You notice them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But after a few weeks, they're just shoes. You're not as thrilled. You don't worry so much if they get a bit dirty. The initial excitement wears off. The novelty fades.
That's a perfect analogy. Material wealth often provides only a limited temporary boost to happiness because we habituate so quickly. The brain adapts to the new normal.
And sometimes we even seem to trick ourselves into feeling okay. Well, that experiment with the boring task.
Ugh. Cognitive dissonance. A classic 1950s study. People did a mind-numbingly boring task, like putting spools on a tray or turning pegs on a board.
Sounds thrilling.
Right. Afterwards, some were paid $20, which was a lot back then, to tell the next participant that the task was actually really interesting and fun.
Okay, so they lied for good money.
And when asked later, they readily admitted the task was boring. The $20 was enough justification for the small lie. But here's the twist. Another group was paid only $1 to tell the same lie.
$1. That's barely worth lying for.
Exactly. And that group, when asked later about the task, consistently rated it as being genuinely more interesting and enjoyable than the $20 group did.
Wait, they convinced themselves it wasn't boring. Why?
To resolve the cognitive dissonance, lying for $20 is easy to justify. But lying for a measly $1 creates internal conflict. Why did I say it was fun when it was awful and I barely got paid? To reduce that uncomfortable feeling, their brains unconsciously revised their memory or assessment of the task. You know what? It wasn't that bad. Actually, it was kind of interesting. It's a form of self-deception to maintain internal consistency, like that Chinese literary figure, Q, finding spiritual victory in defeat.
Wow. We will literally rewrite our own feelings to justify our actions.
It seems so. The author sums it up quite starkly, actually. He says something like, "We do everything we can to live happily and comfortably in this world, but if this contradicts the truth, we are always ready to deceive ourselves."
That's quite a statement. Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. This deep dive has shown our brain really is this kluge. Brilliant, powerful, but definitely not perfect. We've seen how its memory is context-bound, error-prone, easily distorted, how our beliefs can be surprisingly flimsy, manipulated by things like the halo effect or just irrelevant information, how our choices are often driven by ancient, short-sighted instincts rather than cool logic, swayed by framing and relative value, and even our pursuit of happiness is flawed, often fleeting, and sometimes involves outright self-deception.
It's a humbling picture in some ways, isn't it? But the point isn't to despair. The author offers clear advice. Since we can't completely rewire the kluge, how do we work with it more effectively?
Right. What are the practical takeaways?
Well, several key things. First, always make a conscious effort to consider alternative options thoroughly. Don't just jump at the first solution. Second, cultivate the habit of calmly, objectively evaluating evidence. Easier said than done thanks to confirmation bias, but crucial. Third, try redefining problems. Ask questions in different ways. Practice reverse thinking, looking at things from the opposite perspective. This helps fight those cognitive biases we talked about.
Like stepping outside your own frame.
Exactly. Also, critically, always remember, correlation does not equal causation. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other. A fundamental error our brains often make.
Got it. What else?
Simple but important. Avoid making big decisions when you're tired, stressed, or emotionally compromised. Your ancestral brain is more likely to take over then. And don't just set goals. Develop contingency plans. What will you do if plan A doesn't work out? Think ahead about potential obstacles.
That makes sense. Be prepared for the kluge to mess things up sometimes.
Pretty much. And maybe the most profound piece of advice is to, quote, keep distance from yourself.
Keep distance from yourself. How?
Regularly step back and ask, am I overvaluing this current goal? Am I prioritizing immediate pleasure too much compared to my really important long-term objectives? It's about gaining perspective on your own potentially biased thinking in the moment.
Self-reflection as a tool against the kluge. I like that. So look, we all have these cognitive flaws it's built in, but hopefully exploring this deep dive helps you recognize them. Knowing which issues are worth actively working on and which are maybe just inherent imperfections we need to manage. That feels empowering. Acknowledging our brain's limitations, knowing when to push, when to compromise, maybe when to just put that bull by the door for your keys. That seems like the path to living a more, transparent and fulfilling life, even with a klukey brain. So the question for you is, what stood out most from today's deep dive? Which of your own brain's quirks will you be paying a little more attention to now?